It's a great pleasure to be with you today. I'm delighted that Japan is hosting this APEC 2010 Symposium, particularly so quickly after the most recent leaders meeting in Singapore, and to get an early start on the APEC program for the next year, 2010. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to offer these remarks. I apologize for not being able to be with you personally, but my own board of directors is meeting on exactly this date, and that's one conflict that I could not resolve in your favor. It's nevertheless been a great pleasure and privilege just in the recent weeks and months to meet with Vice Minister Ishigi here in Washington, to meet with Director General Nishiyama when I was in Tokyo just a few weeks ago, and to talk about APEC at some length. I'm also delighted that my colleague and senior fellow from our institute, Jeff Schott, is with you at the conference. He can clear up any mistakes that I make in my remarks and answer questions and elaborate on what was said and what I'm hoping to contribute to the discussion in my comments today. I've been asked to cover several topics: the future vision of APEC, the core agenda for APEC, particularly in this year 2010, proposals for action over the coming year with Japan in the chair, and probably most important, how can we get back on track to meet the Bogor goals and move toward a free trade area of the Asia Pacific? I think there's one common answer to all these questions, which I hope under Japanese leadership APEC will pursue in 2010, and I might say beyond that, under U.S. chairmanship in 2011. I think the strategy for APEC in the period ahead is to move as quickly as possible, as comprehensively as possible in terms of both country participation and issue coverage, to negotiate and implement a Trans-Pacific Partnership as a first and very major step toward a free trade area of the Asia Pacific, and thereby achievement of the Bogor goals, maybe not so far from the original target date of 2020 that was set 15 years ago. I think as we look back over APEC's 20-year history, and this year, of course, is the 20th anniversary of APEC, it has been defined in terms of success or failure by its efforts on trade liberalization. That's been its focus. The world's impression of APEC, though it has done other valuable things, has really turned on its success or failure in promoting trade liberalization. My reading is that APEC was very successful in that regard during its first 5 years or so. It set out the Bogor targets to achieve free trade in the area. It thereby pushed the Uruguay round in the GATT, now the WTO, to successful conclusion. It achieved success in negotiating the ITA, the Information Technology Agreement, freeing up $500 billion of international goods and services. It made a promising start on voluntary sectoral liberalization. So it had a very good 5 years, and we should not despair of the prospects for the future. That record, however, has not been as good in the period since. APEC chose to put all its weight behind the Doha round, but in fact did very little to promote the Doha round, and since that effort in the WTO has itself floundered, APEC's own trade agenda has floundered. I now think, however, APEC has an opportunity to get back on track with the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the prospects that it has for success over the next few years. I think great credit is due to the 4 smaller countries, Brunei, Singapore, New Zealand, Chile, that have launched the P4 or the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I think great credit goes to other countries in the region, Australia, Peru, Vietnam, that are now participating actively in the process to turn the Trans-Pacific Partnership into a bigger and more meaningful occasion. But I think what now really gives it an opportunity for major success is President Obama's commitment here in Tokyo during his recent visit for the United States to engage directly and actively in the TPP process. I can testify here from Washington that the engagement is serious, it's deep-seated, and it's a firm commitment. Our administration is now consulting with the Congress, consulting with all its advisory committees, going through the full statutory requirement of our legislation to pave the way for U.S. active engagement in the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And that, of course, could give the whole initiative a much greater impetus. Our friends in other countries may not realize how important was this initiative by the Obama administration to begin engaging actively in the Trans-Pacific Partnership. This was the first positive initiative on trade that the Obama administration has taken in any area. It was clearly driven by the administration's emphasis and priority on Asia, its recognition of the need to engage actively and constructively with Asia on trade and economic issues, partly because that's the most dynamic area in the world economy, partly because it recognizes Asia is moving toward its own arrangements that would otherwise discriminate against the United States and hurt U.S. trade interests. We who have worked hard on the Obama administration and with it to promote its taking positive trade initiatives believe this could be a very important breakthrough, and therefore hope that our friends in Asia will support, promote, and work with the U.S. in moving this initiative forward just as rapidly and as comprehensively as possible. I therefore think the agenda for APEC in 2010 is to do everything possible to make this initiative succeed. In the first instance, that's of course up to the 8 countries, including the United States, that have already indicated their participation in the negotiation. But I think it's equally important that other APEC countries seriously consider joining the enterprise just as soon as possible. I know some, like Canada, are thinking about that. I have every confidence from a recent visit that Korea would do so as well once its free trade agreement with the United States has passed the parliaments in both countries. I would suggest that Japan, as part of its leadership of APEC in 2010, should itself directly engage in the Trans-Pacific Partnership talks. This would provide a critical mass to the whole exercise, make it very important in trade and economic terms, establish Japan's leadership in the entire APEC process, and put a whole additional cast on the TPP initiative and what it will mean. It would broaden the geographic scope of the Trans-Pacific Partnership to cover all major components of the APEC region, and therefore, I think, would be the best possible indication of Japanese leadership of APEC 2010. There's a second critical reason why I think Japan particularly should take leadership by engaging in the Trans-Pacific Partnership in 2010. Japan has taken very active leadership within Asia to promote a new Asian economic architecture. Japan has proposed the ASEAN +6 variant, has initiated the East Asian summits. That's an alternative, of course, to the ASEAN +3. I don't judge how that should come out. But I think it is very important for everybody to recognize, most Asians, of course, do so, that a new East Asian architecture is in the process of formulation. We will have, within the next few years, the equivalent of an East Asian trade agreement, probably an East Asian monetary agreement headed toward an Asian monetary fund, whether it is called that or not. And so whatever the terminology, Asia is headed toward a region-wide economic compact that will in some sense amount to an Asian bloc. APEC faces a major challenge in making sure that the Asian bloc that is developing not draw a new line down the middle of the Pacific, in the famous words of former Secretary of State Jim Baker. The purpose of APEC was, of course, to make sure that there was trans-Pacific agreement so as to avoid any possible disintegration of the Asia-Pacific area. The Trans-Pacific Partnership is a way to promote integration instead, and that is a second major reason why I would hope Japan as chair, but the Asian countries more broadly, would be willing to move simultaneously, in parallel, at the same time, to forge new trans-Pacific trade liberalization. At the same time, they are moving toward economic integration within Asia itself. It seems to me the way to move decisively in that direction is to embrace and develop the Trans-Pacific Partnership as quickly and as comprehensively as possible. That strikes me as the ideal vehicle that is now available to move the whole process. That's because, at the end of the day, the Trans-Pacific Partnership could provide a vital stepping stone toward achieving a free trade area of the Asia-Pacific, which in turn is nothing more than the original Bogor goals that the leaders of APEC decided 15 years ago. A successful realization of the Trans-Pacific Partnership could thus put APEC back on the successful path of trade liberalization, restore the vitality of APEC, provide an institutional locus for Trans-Pacific agreement, and avoid any risk of a breakdown in relations between the two sides of the Pacific. It thereby would provide a favorable prospect for achieving the Bogor goals more or less on schedule by 2010. My bottom line in thanking our Japanese hosts for asking me to speak today is to hope that Japan will lead that process in 2010. I hope Japan itself will join the Trans-Pacific Partnership Initiative during the course of this year and thus give it further and decisive momentum. I would hope Japan and the United States would work closely together to move the process forward in 2010 and perhaps bring it to a successful conclusion, a signing of the Trans-Pacific Partnership at the Honolulu Summit in the fall of 2011. I wish you all the best of success in your conference in discussing APEC 2010. I hope these thoughts will be helpful in suggesting a way to move forward. I wish all of you and all our friends in APEC the best success in getting back on the track of trade liberalization, moving toward a Trans-Pacific Partnership in the next year or two, and thereby restoring the promise of APEC that began 20 years ago. Thank you very much.